Makhachev versus Ian Garry took place last weekend, and there's a lot of talk about Makhachev's future within the welterweight division as a champion. A lot of people are doubting that Makhachev can continue to have success against the top echelon of the welterweight division, and a lot of this has to do with how competitive this fight was with Ian Garry, and perhaps how lackluster it was in terms of the entertainment value, the fight entertainment value. And I'm not going to deny that it was a lackluster fight. It wasn't the most exciting, but I do want to push back a little bit anyway on the first point, and that's the fact that this fight means Makhachev's future as a champ now has to be brought under question. And I've rambled to a bunch of people in my circle about Makhachev's future in the division and what that might look like, because there are certain things that aren't really being highlighted in terms of this particular matchup that took place last weekend, and I want to bring those to the forefront in this video. Before we do that, let's quickly do a recap of the fight. Makhachev won a unanimous decision. It was 3-2 on most fans' scorecards, but two judges, I believe, did have it 4-1. The right man won on the night. Makhachev scored that late takedown in the 5th round, established a lot of control and racked up a few total strike numbers to secure himself that round after losing the 3rd and possibly the 4th as well. And he managed to clutch the victory for himself, and that was impressive to see. It was impressive to see him bring it back after the tide had swung in Ian Garry's favour. I was really impressed with that. He had a couple of moments, in particular in round 2, where he had a left head kick, I believe it was, which knocked Garry down. In terms of strikes thrown, that was certainly the most devastating of the night between these two in this particular matchup anyway. And yeah, the conclusion is Makhachev won. He's still reigning over the welterweight division. And a lot of people have been questioning and doubting Makhachev's ability to continue remaining as the welterweight champion. And I want to bring a couple of things to light. This matchup between Makhachev and Garry, stylistically, and obviously hindsight is 2020 here, but stylistically it lends itself towards being a boring / lackluster / competitive fight because of the way both of these gentlemen fight. On the one hand, we've got Ian Garry, who is predominantly a counter striker. Not necessarily a counter striker, but a distance fighter. He likes to stay at distance. He does counter strike, but he likes to remain at distance, pop in and out, land a couple of strikes, remain out of that danger zone of his opponent. And we've seen that in most of his fights. That's why he doesn't really have any recent finishes, because his fighting style is, you might say, tentative in that sense. And then Makhachev, on the other hand, is more of a counter striker, and he waits for his opponents to kind of come crashing in, and then he'll respond with a counter, deal some damage, which will hopefully lead into a takedown of his own, where he can establish control or lock up a submission, as we saw against Oliveira, for instance. In their fight, Oliveira came with a jumping knee. Makhachev took advantage, right hook, I believe it was, knocked him down and jumped on the choke. Here we've got Ian Garry, who's a distance fighter at 6'3" with a 74. I thought he had more of a reach advantage. I actually thought he was at 75 or 76. But he's got a 4-inch reach advantage over Makhachev on paper, which is really significant. And then on top of that, he does have a sizable height advantage as well, being 6'3" and Makhachev being about 5'10". This makes it incredibly difficult for a counter striker like Makhachev to counter strike, because when Garry comes in, and given that he's a distance fighter, as soon as he's in, he's as quickly going to be out of that kind of striking zone of Makhachev. And so it leaves little room for Makhachev to have any striking success. And given the range of Ian Garry, it was difficult for Makhachev to kind of close that distance as well. So Makhachev struggled in both areas. In the wrestling, because he couldn't really close the distance, Ian Garry had good movement. He uses his length to his advantage to kind of keep Makhachev at bay. But then the striking was also going to prove to be difficult, as we saw, apart from the head kick in round 2, of course. So people are forgetting the styles of these two fighters, and I think because of this, it kind of synergized into the lackluster fight that it was. And I actually think we've got to give Makhachev a bit more credit than we're giving him. And there's not a lot of credit that I've seen for Makhachev. A lot of people are using this as an opportunity to say he's not going to reign much longer over the welterweight division and what have you. And he may very well lose in in the next fight or the fight after that. But the point is, this is a quality win, and against a formidable striker and grappler in Garry. The fact that he had the level of success that he did to be able to win the fight, it's really, really impressive. And I want to mention a couple of other things as well to further demonstrate this point. Ian Garry went in on short notice up against Carlos Prates, one of the most dangerous strikers, certainly in the welterweight division, but I think you could say he's one of the most dangerous strikers in the UFC, in UFC in general, maybe even in history. That's yet to be proven. But he's certainly a dangerous striker, and there's no doubt about it. And not Makhachev. Garry went in there on short notice. I can't remember off the top of my head. It might have been 5 or 6 days' notice, and outstruck the dangerous striker that Prates is. Outstruck him on 4 days, dominated him in that fight. Won 4 rounds to 1, I believe it was. Or did he win 5-0? I can't remember. There was one of those rounds where I believe it was in the later rounds where Makhachev, where Prates had Garry in a bit of trouble. But we've got to take it all in context. Garry was coming in on short notice. The fact that he still dominated those other 4 rounds in the way that he did on 4 or 5 days notice or whatever it was is really impressive, and heavily, in my opinion, it's heavily understated how good of a win that was by Garry. So the fact that he did that to one of the most dangerous strikers in the division just proves how much of an effective striker Garry himself is. And there's something else I want to mention about Ian Garry as well. Ignore his physical stats. If I can find his Wikipedia, Ian Garry comes from a grappling background as well. He is a black belt in judo. And I believe from what I remember, he obtained this black belt when he was 18 years old, which is, a relatively young age to achieve, such a rank within the sport of judo. And Makhachev's style, in terms of his grappling and his takedowns, are kind of judo-esque, if you like. They rely on the throws, they rely on the trips, and so on. And so that was probably why he had a bit of trouble in getting some of those takedowns. Ian Garry has that judo background. He has the wherewithal to know how to defend some of the positional grappling that Makhachev engages in, and he did defend. We saw that because he has that knowledge, he has that experience, and his BJJ is phenomenal as well. I don't know what on paper what belt he is in BJJ, but he certainly comes from a background of grappling training in general. He trains obviously at Shooter Box, with the likes of, I believe, Oliveira and others. He's gonna have an awesome grappling base. I genuinely think he's one of the best grapplers in the welterweight division outside of Makhachev. He, in moments out again, he fought. I believe he fought Shavkat on short notice as well, if I'm not wrong. So he's fought twice on short notice. He fought Shavkat on short notice as well, if I'm not wrong. And he had grappling success against Shavkat. Took the back against Shavkat. And Shavkat, we know what the Caucasus fighters are like. They always come with effective grappling skill, and which is hardly ever matched within the UFC, within the sport in general. And I think people are understating how good Garry is. He had that one loss to Shavkat on short notice. On short notice. In a relatively competitive fight. I don't think Shavkat does that to Ian Garry on a full camp. So I think we've got to give Makhachev the credit he deserves in light of all of this, given the stylistic matchup that Garry is. Stylistically, he is one the most difficult matchup, I believe, in the welterweight division. And I'm gonna probably make a separate video talking about some of the potential matchups against Prates and Morales, which is very, very intriguing for me and for many fans as well. And I'm going to talk a bit about how I think those fights may go and how they compare stylistically to this. But I want to leave it there. Let me know what you guys think of my analysis so far on this fight. I thought it was an incredible performance by Makhachev. I really do. Ian Garry, if it wasn't for Makhachev, would be the champion at 170, 110%. I think he will be the champion once Makhachev leaves the welterweight division, should he retire or if he loses, whatever is in the cards for him. So credit where credit is due. I thought that was a great win. And while it wasn't the most entertaining fight, I liked that there was a lot on the line in terms of building a legacy, not just for Makhachev but for Garry as well. And I think that made the fight exciting for me, even though there wasn't a lot of striking action and you know any kind of significant crazy moments outside of the head kick perhaps. But just the implications on legacy alone was enough to keep me engaged during the fight. And especially with the grappling exchanges, that's what I wanted to see. I wanted to see how is Garry going to respond to the grappling exchanges. How will Makhachev respond should those the advancements he tries to make with the takedowns, if they get shut down, how will he respond? How will he respond to that? And we saw he was down in the third, in the fourth, but with his experience, with his expertise that he's built over the years, he was able to pull it out of the bag in the fifth and secure that round, which ultimately won him the fight. I know not on the scorecards of the judges, but certainly in the eyes of many fans. So credit to him. And I'm looking forward to the future of Ian Garry as well. Listen, I'd love to see a JDM matchup for Ian Garry. I'd love to see that. I'd love to see how that goes. Since they're both coming off a loss, I think it makes sense. Let me know what you guys think, and I'll catch you later. See ya.